Let me start by focusing on what is this course about. And as you know, the title is Sustainable Design of Water Resource System, so the keyword is sustainability. And basically, what is the reason why we decided to include this subject in your study program? The reason is that sustainability and water resources are strictly related, as we will see, because sustainable development is strictly related to availability of water resources and the capability of a community to manage water resources well. Therefore, we wanted to shape your study plan by focusing on what is an emerging need for society today. The emerging need is sustainability as a general concept, and in particular, we focus on the connection between sustainability and water resources. Our will to focus on societal need, it's a reply to an increasing demand from society. Society increasingly demands to science and to engineering then to focus and address what are the emerging societal problems, like, again, sustainability, climate change, and also societal problems in a more political sense, like migration. And keep in mind that when we talk about societal problems, they are not split by disciplines. So there are no societal problems related to engineering, strictly related to engineering, or societal problem related to politics or economics. They are all related in the modern world. And the reason is that with the globalization of economy, everything became, from about the end of the previous century, more strictly related at the global level. So economy is strictly related to politics at the global level, and also water resources management, which was traditionally a very local problem, became a problem with a global relevance. Therefore, when we talk again about society, it's hard today to split between engineering, economy, or humanities. Now there is the need to look at the societal problem for an interdisciplinary point of view, and this is another keyword of the modern world, interdisciplinarity. Which is fine, which means that when we look at education of students, we don't have to use the traditional split between disciplines, engineering or social sciences. We need to look for a connection. And basically everyone agrees on that. Everyone agrees that today a good engineer should have good communication skills, should have some knowledge of economy, should have some knowledge of politics, because you know, when it's time to put into practice what the engineer is called to design, then the engineer must relate with politicians. This is, again, a positive development. On the other hand, there is to say that this induced a big change in the way societal problems are addressed, in the way we communicate, and also in the way we teach engineering. And there is a risk in that. The risk is that if you look for interdisciplinarity, you run the risk of losing specificity. There are problems that need to be solved by engineers. There are problems that need to be solved by economists. They are not expected to work alone. They are expected to work in team. But still, there are some problems like water resources management that need an expert opinion by a very specific kind of designer, researcher, scientist. And therefore, what is the risk? The risk is that on the one hand, we need interdisciplinarity. On the other hand, we don't really know yet how to reach the goal without losing the very specific and very expert opinion of disciplinary sciences. So how to teach engineering in an interdisciplinary way without losing the specificity of engineering, because today more than ever we need a very good engineer and a very good science of engineering. So it's absolutely not true that engineering is less necessary today than in the past. Like I may say the same for economics, I may say the same for political sciences. They are today needed more than ever, but on the other hand, we need an interdisciplinary approach. How to do that? This is still debated, and therefore the question is how to educate an engineer in interdisciplinary context without losing specificity. And this is something that we professors very often discuss, because on the one hand we notice that we became less specific than in the past. There is less mathematics in our education, in our study programs. There is less analytics. On the other hand, there is more information that we deliver to students, because we are sure about that. We are delivering today an amount of information that is higher with respect to the past. So very, very often we discuss on how to reach a good compromise. The good compromise, we think, can be reached with some basic premises. And one basic premise that we are trying to adopt is to focus on societal calls issued by society. So society calls for an improved water resources management, society calls for an improved treatment of climate change, society calls for sustainability, and therefore we try to start from that. This is different with respect to what we used to do in the past. In the past we started from mathematics. The study programs in engineering, as you may know, if you have some older relatives, they can tell you that in engineering in the past, the first 2 years, they focused on mathematics. So it was like analytical computation, geometry, and mechanics, whatever. And then from mathematics, they passed to applied sciences, like structural mechanics, like water resources management, etc. And then at the end of the story, they learned how to design. But in all of that, there was the implicit assumption that they were focusing on societally relevant issues. But societal calls, societal needs were never introduced in the course of engineering. Now we try to start from that. And also we try to start from what is needed from a good engineer. So in the past, the answer was easy. Good knowledge of mathematics, good knowledge of physics, good knowledge of dynamics and mechanics, etc. Now the story is different, and in order to introduce to you this discussion, I wanted to focus on a link to Wikipedia, which is dedicated to what are called the 21st century skills that are expected to be gained by the modern engineers, modern laureates, and therefore are expected to be taught in modern degree programs. I'm sorry that you can't see the figure, but basically there are 3 categories of agreed, recognized skills that are believed to be very important in the 21st century. And I think this is to be clear to you, because your success in your career will depend on your capability to acquire these skills. And they are divided, as I said, in 3 categories: learning and innovation on the left, digital literacy in the middle, and career and life on the right. And when we talk about learning and innovation, here, I'm sorry that you can't read, but they mention critical thinking and problem solving. So there is no need to explain. You understand what is critical thinking and problem solving. You deal with a problem and you have the capability in a creative way to solve it. This is something that is really much appreciated today. by companies, by public administrations, so they have problems indeed. And these problems, keep into account, have not increased with respect to the past, but they became more urgent. In the past, society was less exposed to societal problems. If a flood came, okay, it was a disaster, but society was not as concerned by floods like as it is today. Today we are more concerned. The same flood occurring 100 years ago was less concerning than today, because society today has a higher value. We say that there is higher exposure, so we are more concerned. In the past, when a flood came, they just opened the doors, and some old people told me they were living in floodplains, and they said, okay, when we knew that a flood was coming, we opened the doors of the houses, because if you keep the door closed, what happens is that the flood breaks the door first, and then gets into the house very quickly with a high speed, because the door breaks suddenly, and therefore the flood was damaging the interior of their house. So they were used to open the doors, because in this way the flood came into the house with a slow pace, and they were less suffering. They were used to bring things upstairs, and that was it. They said it was not a big deal. Today, you know, if water comes into your house, it's a much relevant problem. So, as I said, we have more or less the same problems, so we don't have to be like catastrophic in our view. Problems are not going to increase, but it's our concern for the same problem that is increasing, because society is developing. So again, problem solving, and then creativity and innovation. You have to be very good in grasping innovation. You have to understand that today everything is changing at a very, very quickly, and therefore you have to be able to get the innovation, to understand what is changing, and be able to adapt. Think about the internet. 20 years ago we didn't have any internet, and then in 20 years suddenly everything is changed in the communication, social media, whatever. As I said, 20 years is a very short time span. I could see it, and people who could see it needed to adapt. Of course, some people didn't adapt, but if you don't adapt, you don't keep the pace with the evolving world. Okay, and then there is communication, extremely important. No need to explain why. In the past, the engineer, again, I already told you, was used to work alone in a room with little light. Today it's completely different. The engineer is exposed, goes into the TV, needs to be able to speak, and etc. And then there is collaboration. Collaboration, or you can call it team working, capability to work in a team, is something that today it's really looked at. Companies really want people who are easygoing and have good team working skills. Some people put it in the CV. I am a team person, some declare in the CV, which means that you like working in a team. And this is something that today is necessary more than ever, because it's interdisciplinarity. So it means that you need to work with other people. It implies that. Literacy means your capability to understand digital things, digital communication, digital tools. Literacy means your capability to understand and use it. And therefore, you know, digital literacy is extremely important, information literacy, any kind of media literacy, which means that you have to be able to go on the web and distill the information. The web is an enormous, delivers an enormous amount of information. It's an extremely important tool, but it's not easy to navigate on the web, as you know. And in some fields it's more difficult than in other fields. If you navigate it and you look for some information on medicine, it's much more complicated than for engineering. On the other hand, I absolutely don't agree with the medical doctors who say you shouldn't go to the web to look for your symptoms. Absolutely, this is a bad suggestion. The web is amazing. The web is an essential source of information. but we have to be able to distill it. So if you have symptoms and you just go on the web and you get what is displayed on the screen without a critical analysis, then it's very bad, of course, because you get over-concerned for everything. Even if you put like pain in a finger, you see terrible consequences that can derive from a pain in a finger. But if you are able to distill the information and you have pain in a finger, and instead of going to the medical doctor, you just learn how to find the remedy, this is extremely useful for society. Because, of course, you don't go to the medical doctor and you leave the medical doctor to the people who need it. Therefore, it's extremely important to be able to distill what is presented by the web. And this is what I'm trying to do here with these tutorials. I give to you some links, and I already told you I trust Wikipedia in English, for instance, but you have to learn how to trust the information. So you go to a website. One of the first things that I do is to click on who we are, or about us, because you understand if these people who wrote the website have a political influence, have political links, have whatever. You check if it's trust-deserving or not. And then career and life. Here it's mentioned. I really don't understand, because this is red in my screen and it's black here anyway. I think probably I would need to play with the projector, but let's not to lose time for now, and then maybe I come another day to play with it a little bit. Here we have flexibility and adaptability, and it's related to team working capabilities. You have to be very flexible, be able to adapt, because we live in a period of change. And therefore change sometimes is unavoidable. And it's positive also. The worst situation is a steady state situation where nothing changes. This is really annoying, and it's also an obstacle to evolution. Evolution of society, of humanity, means change. But, of course, change implies that you need to adapt. And today, change, as I said, is occurring at a faster pace than in the past. And then the second row is initiative and self-direction. Again, it means independency. Sometimes students come to me and ask me, are you willing to advise me for my thesis? And the first question is, do you like to be independent? Because this is essential for me, because I don't have much time, so I need independent students. And this is an example of how independency is important. And then social and cross-cultural interaction, productivity and accountability. And productivity, accountability means that you give to your boss the means to check what you are producing. So productivity is extremely important. I will focus on productivity a lot during our interaction, because it's it's something that makes your life easier. If you are productive, your life is definitely easier, definitely. And accountability means that you give the way to others to check your productivity. And then leadership and responsibility. Leadership doesn't mean that you have to be pretentious. Quite the opposite. Very often leadership is coupled with low profile. If you look sometimes at the very successful leaders, usually they, not always, but sometimes they keep a low profile, especially for your success in the long term. Low profile sometimes is less productive in the short term with respect to a pretentious attitude, but in the long term, the low profile usually pays back. Of course, it's also a matter of personal preference, but let's say in an objective way that leadership is extremely important, and then you have to find your way to establish your leadership. There are several different ways. Okay, and in order to conclude this premise, what I would like to do is that in my teaching attitude, I try to revert the classical top-down approach that starts from the theory, mathematics, as I said before, and goes down to solutions. What I would like to do is to start from what we need, the required solutions, and then identify what are the design variables that I need. And then, once that I have clear what is the design variable, like in the peak flow, talk about the models and the related data requirement. And then talk about the theory. Why is that? Because in this way you are sure that you learn the necessary theory. In the past we used to learn a lot of mathematics, more than required. Of course it is not useless. If you learn, it's never useless. But on the other hand, if you want to be very productive, if you want to acquire specific skills, you have to be clear what is the target and focus first on the necessary theory, because you can't learn everything, especially today. In the past it was easier. Today it becomes more difficult, because we have to work in an interdisciplinary context. So you have to know something about economics, but not everything, because you are not an economist. And this is my approach. Now, as I said, let me go to the second lecture. Here, Sustainability in the 21st Century. There is a PowerPoint at the end. Let me download it, because I hope that it's easier with the PowerPoint. You see there is a link here, download the PowerPoint presentation. This is what I'm using in order to introduce this lecture. And as I said, you don't have to study on the PowerPoint, but you have to study on the web page. Okay, a little bit better. So, the keyword here is sustainability, as I said. Now, I would like, but I don't want to embarrass you at the second lecture, I would have a wish to ask you what is your definition of sustainability, but I'm not asking, so don't worry about that, but think about it. So elaborate in your mind if you have an idea of what sustainability is. Of course you have an idea, but it would be interesting to make this exercise, but again I don't want to make it now, like write it down a definition. And then we compare your definition with what I'm proposing to you, which derives from international brainstormings, etc. So try to elaborate an idea. What is sustainability? And what is the reason why I'm suggesting this exercise? Because I am really convinced that everybody knows today about sustainability, but only a few people can provide an explanation of what it means. And indeed, it's an extremely important concept that we will see, but we still miss a technical treatment of sustainability. And I think it is important that I make this clear at the beginning. So, sustainable design water resource system, we don't know what it's about really. It's something that we have to elaborate because we are moving towards an emerging need. Sustainable water resources management, circular water resources management. It's an emerging need. It was also needed in the past, as you will see, but really this is something new. It's a need that is something that is strictly related to our evolving society. 100 years ago, if you asked people what are your major concerns, they wouldn't say water resources, absolutely. And even 50 years ago, people wouldn't say my concern is water resources. 50 years ago, they would say petrol, lack of petrol, or very expensive petrols, so expensive fuel for cars, but they wouldn't say, or they may start 50 years ago by saying water pollution in rivers, but they wouldn't say really water resources management. Today, if you ask, if you make a poll, an international poll about the major concerns for humanity, they would say terrorism, climate change, or related to environment, they would say climate change and water resources. And then, in the broadest sense, they would say like terrorism, international tensions, migration. But keep in mind that terrorism and migration in some way are related to environment, to water resources and climate change. Not as much as some media say, but there is some connection. Okay, so let's try to understand what is sustainability. and how it emerged as a concern. I think it is important to look back a little bit to introduce this topic. And again, if you look at the past, if you look at the history of humanity, you see examples where at the local level, some developed civilizations had the problem of sustainability. Like, for instance, Athens, when the Greek civilization was flourishing, grew up a lot as a city, and at a certain problem, they had the problem of, they experienced the need of systematically collecting wastes in the city. So waste disposal is a typical example of local unsustainability that was experienced already in the far past. If you look at the Romans, they had the problem when Rome was growing up of finding water, and they built the aqueducts, the Roman aqueducts that we still see today. So this was another problem related to sustainability, and in particular to water resources management. But they were local problems. And they were basically related to very specific needs, waste disposal or water supply. It was very specific, relatively easy to solve. And therefore sustainability didn't emerge as a real problem. So people experienced some needs and they found, in many cases, an easy way to deal with it. It was not perceived as a problem. And when was the time when people started really to see that the development of society was not sustainable? So in the past, they didn't experience a sustainability problem because they were able to solve it. When was the time when people really started getting concerned by the, concern that the development may be not sustainable? It was just after the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took place between, some people say, 1750 and the end of the 19th century, up to 1890, 1900. If I had to identify when was the time of really when happened a big change in the industrial production, was between 1850 to 1900, because they started the first big companies for manufacturing. They put a lot of people to live together in cities in a systematic way. Before that, before the Industrial Revolution, people were not concentrating as much in the cities because they were living mainly of agriculture, and therefore they need to live in the countryside. They needed to live where they were farming, where they were fishing. The Industrial Revolution brought millions of people to concentrate in the cities. And also the Industrial Revolution highlighted the importance of energy, which was made available at the beginning in the form of steam power. And energy became important. They realized that in order to sustain an industrial production, they needed energy. And then electricity came, and therefore there was the need to produce a high amount of electricity. But besides that, concentrating a lot of people in the cities caused two problems. First, water pollution, pollution in general, and water pollution, and therefore rivers started to become polluted. This was the first emerging problem. The second emerging problem was air pollution, because in order to produce energy, which was derived at the beginning by coal consumption, and coal is carbone, coal consumptions in order to heat the water to produce steam power. this caused air pollution in a very heavy way. And of course, this occurred first in the most developed countries and then expanded to the other countries. If you look at the history of Italy, for instance, we know that up to 1920, people used to go in the downstream the Po River, in the lower part of the Po River, and used to get water and drink it directly. I had some people 20 years ago, old people, that told me that they were used to do that. They looked for the part of the river where water was flowing at higher velocity. They said, I looked for very live water, fresh water, meaning that the water was not how to say, not stagnant, was moving. And was oxygenated, rich of oxygen, but they used to just to keep the water and drink it from the Po River in 1920. And then you know that 20 years ago it was dangerous even to bath in the Po River. It was forbidden because water was really very bad quality. Now it's getting back a little bit because by following the example of other countries who experienced the same problem before, now we use to depurate the water that from sewer systems before releasing water from the sewer system to the river. Because river pollution is caused by the fact that basically in the city you need to collect wastewater in sewers, and if you don't treat it, basically wastewater is to be released in surface water in rivers. And of course, if you don't treat it, the river becomes polluted, especially when there is a lower discharge in the river because you have less dilution of water. So this was the problem. And then, as I said, air pollution, which caused several health problems to people. So it was clear that this was something that it was not easy to solve. And this was basically the emergence of sustainability. And at the beginning, people were just concerned by water and air pollution, but later on, there were other impacts that emerged. And here you have a partial list, a very partial list. First of all, intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture implies the use of nitrates and therefore pollution of surface water and groundwater. Nitrates are nutrients, and therefore if you pollute river water with nitrates, what you get is a flourishment of an algal flourishment, which is also transferred to the sea. So you may remember the algal problem in the Adriatic Sea about 20 years ago, which sometimes still occurs today. And this is due to intensive agriculture nitrates. And also intensive agriculture causes a deprivation of surface water because people need water to irrigate, and therefore intensive agriculture caused the water resources management problems. Keep in mind that we will discuss about it. If we talk about water consumption by humanity, 70% is water consumption is for agriculture. So 70% at the global level of water uses is water for food. And therefore, you know, agriculture is really important, really matters in water resources management. And then construction of dams and river barrages. If you need more water, the first solution is to store it. And which is fine. I mean, dams and barrages, artificial reservoirs are a very good solution. On the other hand, they deprivate the downstream areas of river flow with consequences on the ecosystems, etc. So dams are, again, very good solution, but on the other hand, they have a relevant impact, and they are not lasting forever because they are subjected to siltation, which means accumulation of sediments in the reservoir, which reduces the storage capacity. Now, increasing demands for energy, and today energy is still mainly produced by burning fossil fuels, which means CO2 emissions, etc. And this problem will not be solved soon. So there are some people who say in the TV, in the social, In 20 years, renewable energies will cover most of our needs. This is unrealistic. Now, renewable energy covers about 2% of the needs, the energy needs of humanity. The vast majority, again, is obtained by burning fossil fuels. And then, of course, this causes an increase of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which means climate change. So these are some of the problems that were experienced in the 20th century, new problems for humanity. These were never experienced before. Okay? And this is relevant. This is something that we have to keep in mind. These are, again, new problems. We should be happy to have these problems because it means that our societal, our lifestyle is improved a lot. It means that we had a societal evolution that was very relevant. On the other hand, we have to be aware that for some of these problems, we still don't have a solution. Now, problems means that people get concerned, and therefore, people started to activate global forums on sustainability. Again, this is new. What is new? Global problems. So people perceived in the 20th century that sustainability was a global problem and solution needed to be identified at the global level. Before than that, sustainability was perceived as a local problem, like pollution of a river, air pollution in a city, like water resources, water supply to Rome, waste disposal in Athens, local problems. So the solution was to be found at the local level. In the 20th century, people realized that if you talk about CO2 emissions, it's not a local problem. If you talk about water resources management, it's no more a local problem. It's becoming a global problem, and they realized that they needed a political agreement in order to find the solutions. So this is why some people had the idea to activate global forums, which is extremely difficult because you see that politics is difficult at the national level. You see today the debate on